Hi, welcome once again. This is a new session, and we are going to be delving more into the strategic case study. In week one, or in the first session, we talked about strategy. We talked about stakeholder expectations and all that. And I believe if you haven't watched that session, just check this YouTube channel and you'll see that session in there. If you have any questions, as usual, the number is on the slide, or you can, drop a comment and I'll gladly answer that. So last session, we talked about the strategy, we talked about stakeholders, we talked about, the approaches to even strategic planning. But today we would want to delve more into stakeholder mapping, we can't set our strategy ignoring stakeholders. So how do we handle stakeholders? Very, very important. How do we handle stakeholders? So first off, let's understand, right, that what we use to assess or map our stakeholders, there are different approaches we could use. So I mentioned two fundamental ones. You can do what we call stakeholder mapping. You are mapping out your stakeholders. So basically, if you are mapping out your stakeholders, there are certain parameters that you would use. So you are mapping them out based on, their significance, their interests, their power, etc. So first off, let's understand what are some of the parameters that you could use. So the first one is the power versus interest matrix. The power versus interest matrix. So this basically groups stakeholders into two main classifications, right? Or based on two main parameters, which is power and interest. Power and interest. Very, very key. Power and interest. So there are four groups of stakeholders in this case. Number one is those who have low power and low interest. Their power is low as stakeholders and their interest is also low. So what should be the approach of organizations in handling this group of stakeholders? You don't apply a lot of effort here, you apply minimal efforts because, regardless, their power is low, their interest is also low. So their effort is minimal. The effort that the organization puts into handling this group of stakeholders should be minimal, shouldn't spend all your time here. The next thing is that there are stakeholders who are also have low power and high interest. Low power, high interest. So what does it mean here? If someone has low power and high interest, you should keep them informed as an organization because of their interest. They do not have a lot of power, but they are interested in what you're doing. So you always need to keep them informed. Let them know what is going on. That is very, very crucial. Very, very crucial. Always let them know what is going on. You also have another group who have high power and low interest. You see how the dynamics are playing out. So you also have those who have high power and low interest. So what does this exactly mean? What does this mean? If someone has high power and low interest, you need to keep them satisfied because they have the power. They have the power to change things that can affect you. They have a power to change things that can. So you always need to keep them satisfied. You need to be sure that they are okay. Because they have power, they can influence a lot of things. They need to make sure that they are satisfied. Then there's also another group of stakeholders who fall into the category of high power and high interest. These group of stakeholders are key players. They are key players. They have high power, high interest. So you need to make sure that you spend your maximum efforts here in making sure that these stakeholders are okay. Stakeholder mapping is interesting because it gives you some form of focus in knowing how to handle these groups of stakeholders. Otherwise, it becomes a difficult thing. So you know, based on the power and interest levels of the group of stakeholders, you're able to, you know, develop an approach, an appropriate approach in handling them. This is very, very crucial. So I need you to understand that. Then there's also another matrix, which is called the position versus importance matrix. Position versus importance. So these are also two parameters based on which you can categorize the stakeholders. So first off, there are stakeholders who have an opposing position, but their importance is low. So we call them opposing position, low importance. You have an opposing position, but their importance is so low. So these are stakeholders who we define as problematic stakeholders. You know, they are just opposing you. You know, they are just making things difficult for you. So they are problematic. They are problematic stakeholders. You also have those who have an opposing position but a high importance, not a low importance. They have a high importance. And so these stakeholders are defined as antagonistic. So you have opposing position, high importance. These are antagonistic. They are just opposing your agenda, and they have a lot of influence and they have a lot of importance. They also have a group of stakeholders who have a supportive position. They support what you are doing, but they have a low importance. You know, even though they are supportive and all that, they have a low importance. So these are low priority stakeholders. Even though they are supporting you, their importance is not up there. You know, so these are low priority stakeholders. They also have those who have a supportive position and high importance, you know, who are supportive and they are of high importance. So these are your supporters. These stakeholders are described as your supporters. They are your cheerleaders. You know, they support you and also have high importance. These are stakeholders that you really want on your side, you know, in your business, because they are supporting you and, you know, they are relevant. They are relevant in the industry, you know. So you need to understand that not all stakeholders are the same. That's a lesson we get from here. Not all stakeholders are the same. Stakeholders cannot be the same. So you need to categorize them and understand how to approach them in order to gain the maximum benefits, you know, from them. And that helps you to shape your strategy or formulate your strategy. Very, very important. It's very, very important. Then, so let's move on to talking about environmental analysis, right? Let's move on to talk about environmental analysis. We said that one of the key words when it comes to defining strategy is the environmental context. You know, the environmental context, that's very, very important. You cannot talk about strategy in a vacuum. There has to be a context. There has to be an environmental context. So what is environmental analysis? It's basically analysis of the general factors that affect the business, and which exist outside the organization. You know, they usually exist outside the organization. And so it's basically the general factors that affect the business, And what's the purpose of this environmental analysis? Is to help companies to understand the environment in which they operate. Very, very crucial. Very, very crucial. You need to understand the environment in which you operate. You need to identify the factors in that environment. You know, so you can't, you know, as an organization, you are not just operating in a vacuum. Things are influencing you and you're also influencing things. So you need to understand the factors that are affecting your business. You would want to know that, and you want to understand how best you can manage it. So there are models for doing this. There are strategic models for doing this. And two of the key strategic models, we'll be talking about strategic models in a lot more detail as we go on. But two of these models that we use to do our environmental analysis is the Portels model and the Portels Diamond framework or model. So let's dive into these two models. Let's try to understand, the brain behind these models. Let's try to understand the limitations, how we can apply them, and all that. So just stick and stay with me while we go through this. So let's talk about the PESTEL model first. Let's talk about the PESTEL model. So the PESTEL is just an acronym for political, economic, sociocultural, technological, ecological, and legal. That's what the PESTEL is all about. That's what the PESTEL is all about. So you have all these factors, affecting you in the external environment. You see, that's quite interesting. So it helps you to know that your business, is being influenced by these forces. So the first is the political. Under political, there are some things you need to think about, right? First off, you need to think about the country you are in which you are located. Is it stable enough? Are there things like wars? Is there civil unrest? Is there terrorist activity? You need to understand the political landscape. If a country is not stable, it's difficult to do business. It definitely affects your mode of operations. It definitely does. Then you also have the economic factors. You have the economic factors. So what are the economic factors? These are things around growth rates, economic growth rates, inflation, exchange rates, factors like this that exist in the external environment definitely affect the organization. So if an economy is growing at a very fast rate, it means that this is a booming economy, and therefore it positively impacts businesses. It positively impacts businesses. So these are economic factors, that affect your organization and the way you do business. Then there's also the sociocultural bit. The sociocultural bit, one of the things you need to understand is that the values of a people, the beliefs of a people certainly affects your business. So if you are located in a place where they have certain beliefs, probably like Sunday is a day of worship or Saturday is a day of worship, then that affects your business, So things like religion, things like age, things like ethnic structure, things like beliefs, values of the people, it definitely affects your business. And you need to find ways to work around these things. So that's why you need to understand. You need to have this PESTEL framework so that you understand exactly how to go about this. Very, very important. Then you also have the technological bit. You have the technological bit. The technological, we are talking about developments in information technology, innovation. Technology is fast changing. These days, technology is moving at a very, very fast pace. So technologically, you need to understand where you are. What are the things that are emerging in the external environment? Otherwise, if you are not abreast with technology, your business can be wiped out. It can be wiped out in a second. Then you also have ecological. The ecological factors, you are looking more at the environment, you are looking at environmental legislation, you are looking at laws surrounding carbon emissions, basically things that protect the ecology, the environment, are very, very key and definitely influence how you operate as an organization. Then you also have legal factors. Legal factors. The legal factors that exist in the external environment are basically the laws that regulate the companies. So if you go into a certain nation and they have, certain laws that surround the operation of businesses, it definitely affects you. It definitely affects you. And so you need to be on the lookout. When you are launching a business at a place, you need to understand what are the things that exist in my environment. And then you can go ahead, to analyze them and see how you can manage these forces or factors. So we talked about the PESTEL framework. It's a very, very great framework and helps you to understand the significant influences in your environment, but it has some limitations. One, it's not a quantitative model. This is more of a qualitative model. Because it's expressed in narrative terms, you'd want to understand things from a qualitative viewpoint. So it's not a quantitative model. It's also not necessarily futuristic. It helps the organization to understand, its environment at a certain point. Presently, what are the influences that affect my business? So it's not necessarily futuristic. It focuses on the present and the present factors in the environment that are influencing the organization. So let's move on to the next model, which is the Portels Diamond, which is focused on national competitive advantage. So there are 4 factors in this diamond. The first is the firm strategy. The second is favorable factor conditions. The third is demand conditions. And the fourth is related and support industry. So all these things help to drive national competitive advantage. So let's talk about firm strategy. Structure and rivalry. There are 2 things that help to drive or produce national competitive advantage. 2 things, which is the strategy of the firm, which is the forward-looking ability of the firm, and also the healthy competition that exists between companies in a country. All these things help to produce national competitive advantage. So firm strategy and rivalry, help to produce national competitive advantage. When there's rivalry between firms, healthy rivalry, I'm not talking about unhealthy competition, but healthy rivalry, it helps to produce what we call national competitive advantage. Another thing that helps to produce national competitive advantage is favorable factor conditions. And by factor, I mean economic inputs. So land, labor, and capital. So for example, some countries are heavily resourced when it comes to, IT skills. That's a favorable factor condition. Some countries are heavily resourced when it comes to natural resources. That's also a favorable factor condition. So these economic inputs and how well you're able to, harness them will help you to produce national competitive advantage. Yes. Then you also have demand conditions. Strong local demand also helps to produce national competitive advantage. If you have a huge population, it means that there's a huge market. There's a huge market there. And so in places like China, where they have a huge population, that's a strong market and that's huge demand. So that's huge demand or huge demand conditions help to produce national competitive advantage. They also have related and support industries. So there are countries that have related industries, and these related industries are driven by strong innovation and competition. So a typical example of related and support industries is the Silicon Valley in the USA, where you have different kind of industries or different kind of companies, coexisting in order to, drive innovation, drive enterprise and drive business. So the related and support industries also drives national competitive advantage. A typical example is Silicon Valley in the USA. So this is also another model which you can use to assess your environment, but this is on a national level. So it's a very, very useful model which you can use to apply when you are looking at things from a national perspective. Very, very key. However, the Portels Diamond has certain limitations. The first limitation is that it does not necessarily consider multinationals because it's looking at things from a localized national standpoint. It does not necessarily consider multinationals. The second thing is that it seems to apply more to advanced nations than developing economies. It seems to apply to advanced nations because developing economies, businesses are not too strong, they are not too structured. And so this model usually, it seems that it applies more to advanced nations where things are, where systems work and where things are working properly. So that's something just to understand. So that's where we'll end it for today. This was an addition to the earlier session we had, which I needed to complete. So you have an understanding of strategy, stakeholders, and environmental analysis in general. So thank you very much for joining. Just hit the subscribe button and, click the notification bell so that anytime I post a video, you'll be the first to receive it. So thank you very much for watching and have a great day.